of Representatives deciding things. What I'm not okay
Good.
with...
I'm glad to hear that.
No, I understand it's a republic. It's not a direct democracy.
Yeah, because direct democracy doesn't work, and it never actually has worked in the history of the world. In fact, studies have shown that for a population of about 100, you can manage a direct democracy. Beyond that, it just becomes chaos.
Well, I know that when I lived in Switzerland for a year, they had... They didn't give women the right to vote in one of the Swiss cantons until 1973. And the reason they didn't is because they had direct democracy. And the way you voted in Appenzeller Innerrhoden was to lift up your sword. And because women didn't have swords, they couldn't vote, Terry. So...
Oh, I wish I'd been a sword salesman back then.
You couldn't go in the public square and lift your sword to vote yay or nay if you were a woman. So they said, sorry, women don't get the right to vote. That was changed.
Isn't that a little bit over-phallic?
I think it's extremely phallic, actually.
That's really ridiculous. I've just lost all respect for Switzerland. I'm sorry.
It was just one canton, but it actually was the last part of Western Europe to give women the right to vote, this little canton in
Well, we're
Switzerland.
moving in the same direction, and we should be aware of that, because the new choice is going to be, unless you raise your AR-15, you're not allowed to vote.
That's true. So here's what I guess I want to focus on. I understand why a minority entrenched wants to stay in power, but... If Virginia, for example, and I don't mean to pick solely on Virginia. This is happening in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio and Minnesota. Anywhere you see...
Let me make you comfortable, Mark,
okay.
as a citizen of Virginia and still a taxpayer of Virginia,
That's
even
true.
though I'm not living there at the moment.
Okay.
Virginia's goal is to top Texas in absurd laws, rules, and behavior. So you can go ahead and criticize Virginia. It's okay.
But here's the difference, all right? Texas, at least as of now, before the Latino population grows and we get it moving over to the blue area, Texas is a red state. The majority of the population supports Republicans. That's Texas. It's a reason why I'm not a huge fan of Texas. But Virginia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, these are all states that vote Democratic, at least in the last two elections. For the other states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, they voted blue for the last 5 or 6 elections. And so the majority of the population supports the Democratic Party. But because Republicans control the levers of state government and can draw the district lines and are now talking about changing the electoral vote count, the Republicans can actually stay in control of a state where the majority of the voters want Democrats. And that is a really, really dangerous thing.
Yeah, that's not nice. But, the problem always does come down to is what kind of democracy do we want? And I think even more insidious than some of these procedures that get people in or out of office is once they get into office, the procedures there, and we just mentioned the filibuster as one of them, the procedures there have escalated and transformed to the place, Mark, where the whole attitude of the government really is you don't get anything accomplished. And not only do you not get anything accomplished, if you do get something accomplished, it's immediately undermined. A simple example being, if you pass a bill to do X, Y, Z, and the majority votes for it, then a little time later, the majority changes, and they vote to unfund it. They don't vote against the law. They don't even have to repeal the law. They just unfund it. Or they go through, like they've done with the ATF. They haven't had a director approved for the ATF for, 6 years?
That's true.
So you can castrate every single law that is passed in our Congress now. Therefore, the main goal seems to be to, in fact, do nothing.
One of the clearest examples would be the Dodd-Frank law. Now, this is a law actually criticized by many on the left for not going far enough, but that does take a step forward into regulating large financial institutions to stop the too big to fail problem, where basically institutions can gamble a bunch of money. If they win the gamble, they win a ton, and if they lose the gamble, we taxpayers pay them off because they're so big that if they fail, the entire economy falls apart. Well, Dodd-Frank is on its path to fixing that, but the Republicans are preventing Richard Cordray, the director, from being approved. There was just a court case. He probably is going to be thrown out of office because the Republicans refused to allow anyone to be nominated, and they're also working behind the scenes to stop the regulation process. So you're right. They can't kill the bill, which was passed by a clear majority of the Senate and the House and the President and the American people, but they can try to sort of destroy it piece by piece. And that's another way of the minority working its will. One of the things that you mentioned to me, Terry, was that secret amendments actually is a great way for even a single senator, a single House representative to frustrate the majority. Tell me how that works.
Well, the classic example was the congressman, what's his name? Kansas that castrated the ATF. And basically what he did is he slipped in an amendment, and I guess it's, oh my goodness, almost about 20 years ago now, that he slipped in an amendment that basically prevented the ATF from keeping records of background checks for like more than 24 hours. It defunded the ATF to the point of, back in that time, 20-some years ago, they had approximately 2,500 agents. That's all they have today. There's been no increase in ATF agents, even though obviously the complexity of the situation has increased. And the amendment that he slipped in just really took away every enforcement power that the ATF had. And the amendment, I forget the bill that he slipped it into, but it had nothing to do with the bill that was, quote, publicly passed.
And for those of you who don't know, the ATF stands for Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, which is a weird concatenation anyway. I guess it comes out of the Prohibition era. But one of the things, for example, that the Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Department cannot do is they cannot tell somebody who not to sell a semi-automatic assault weapon with a 100-bullet drum to someone who is extremely inebriated and high at the same time. Now,
or any gun, for that matter.
Well, that's true. So if you're a bartender and you see someone visibly drunk in your bar, you cannot serve them another drink, because if you do and they drive home, you can be sued. You can, however, give the person who is too drunk to drive an assault weapon, and that is perfectly legal because of Todd Tiert of Kansas.
Yeah, that's his name, yeah. And it's insane. I mean, it happens. The other thing that happens, Mark, that really discourages me at all this is the more dysfunctional that Congress becomes, and the more convinced that American public becomes that government can't work, which is also very destructive. The more this happens, the more the president is forced into, or at least feels he's forced into, taking presidential directives.
That's
which,
true.
Again, is really kind of iffy in terms of the Constitution, but has become a pattern now, and President Obama has issued, I believe, more presidential directives than George Bush did by this point. It's a way of circumventing Congress, even though it may be something that we all agree, or most of us agree, is something that needs to be done. It's putting power into the executive office that the executive office the president never should have had, and because of that, the very next president can simply put in another directive that repeals the previous directive. There's no legislative process whatsoever, and it's shifting our government into a chaotic do-nothing Congress, giving the president more power, but even that is tenuous. And this kind of all of these obstacles, all of this chaos that has been introduced and legally introduced, or at least by precedent introduced into our system, is putting us into a situation where people are going to be more and more frustrated, and therefore, because they're frustrated and afraid, the public, the majority, will be seeking more extreme solutions. And we know where that heads.
See, I would argue this is really a war, a legislative war. It's a battle, and it's escalation. And Congress does something improper, and then the president does something improper to combat the improperness of Congress, and then Congress responds by doing something more improper, so the president decides to do something even more improper, and lo and behold, representative democracy is in big trouble. I want to talk about that sort of escalating war back and forth when we come back. If you want to dial in, it's 202-889-9797, 202-889-9797. This is Mark Levine and Terry D. Kester. This is the Raucous Caucus on We Act Radio, 1480 AM. We'll be right back right after this short message.
Hey Gotcha News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us on...
Welcome back to the Raucous Caucus. This is Mark Levine with Terry D. Kester talking about really the battle between the president and Congress, both breaking the rules here. So here's what happened recently. So President Obama has fewer of his nominees approved than any president, dating back to the end of World War II.
And it also includes a lot, not just of appointees of agencies, but of judges throughout the United States.
So it's both judicial appointments and it's appointments to run his cabinet. Now, this started, to be fair, the Democrats actually filibustered Republican judicial appointments that they considered extreme back in the 1990s. I want to make a distinction with you, Terry, and I don't hear many people making that distinction, but here's what I'd like to make. I'm actually fine with filibustering lifetime appointment of judges. I'm fine with that because, to me, if you're going to appoint a judge for life, a federal judge, particularly a Supreme Court justice, but also on the Federal Court of Appeals, even the lower federal district courts, that judge cannot be fired absent impeachment. They got to do something really, really bad to lose their job. And because a judge is supposed to be a fair arbiter of justice and to apply the law fairly, I actually am fine with arguing that a judge needs to have 60 votes. So I'm okay with filibustering judges. I'm not okay, however, with filibustering cabinet positions. Cabinet positions are chosen by the President of the United States. They serve at his or her will. We haven't had a her yet, but we will eventually. And it seems to me that they go when the president goes. At the end of the day, it's really just the president exercising his or her authority. And to me, the failure to allow Richard Cordray to serve or the people at the National Labor Relations Board, they're just trying to shut the government down. So I'd like to see a compromise whereby you can filibuster judicial nominees, but you can't filibuster presidential appointments. What say you?
Well, I mean, basically, I agree with you, Mark, because I think what you're really saying here, and people really have to begin to understand this, is, I think it was Benjamin Franklin said, you've got your democracy now to be able to see if you can keep it. The point not being, that we've got to put up fences and we've got to have guns so that we can, prevent the foreign herd from invading us. The point being that democracy, by its nature, is a very, very fragile system of government, because what it's trying to do is provide a way that society can be corrected and contained enough so that private dictatorial power cannot ever take over, be that power by the super rich or be that power by a king or whatever. Democracy is an attempt to diffuse power, is really what it's about. And it's complex and it's fragile. And we have to be aware of that, and anything that begins to get in the way, such as these secret amendments. I'm not against, filibusters per se, but the fact that you can simply threaten to filibuster, and the fact that the public never knows who it is that threatened to filibuster, the fact that that can stop an appointment or legislation is absurd.
I tell you,
the fact that everything can be, that you can take any single bill and you can attach to it any pork or any other amendment on any other issue, even on no matter what the bill is about, is absurd. And these kind of things are really what are shattering democracy, and the American public has got to realize that the process of democracy is really what we have to pay attention to.
Well, there's been some reform, and it is in the right direction, and it's clearly not far enough, and I do not want to argue it's far enough, but I am glad to see a tiny, tiny bit of reform. No, we haven't gone back to speaking filibusters, which is what I'd like to see. If you care strongly enough about an issue to obstruct the whole nation's business, damn it, you should be on the floor arguing day and night. Strom Thurmond famously was against the nation's civil rights bills. In 1957, he gave an 18-hour speech. It began in the morning, continued. He was the only one stopping very early, very modest civil rights reform. And finally, after 18 hours of speaking, the senator had to use the facilities. He couldn't hold it in any longer. And his bladder called, and they passed the 1957 Civil Rights Act.
And who the heck wants democracy saved by a bladder call? If that's all you got.
Well, the point is that if only one senator wants to stop this thing, the will of the majority should control it. He can make his impassioned speech for 18 hours, but at some point he has to give up the floor, and obviously America is better for it. So I'd like to see that. That hasn't happened. But one of the things that has happened that I think is a step forward is Rita McConnell, the head of the Democratic-Republican Party in the Senate, have agreed to, number one, stop the two-stage filibuster. It used to be you could filibuster the filibuster. You could actually filibuster a motion to proceed on whether or not you filibuster, and basically that just doubled the time and made the Senate extremely unproductive. That's gone. There's basically one filibuster per bill. That's it. So that's something.
Is it still allowed to be secret? I missed whether or not that's been
that was
changed.
that was the other change. Secret holds are now gone.
Good.
You
Thank
can't.
heavens.
You cannot. You could still secretly amend stuff. Just so we're clear here, you can still stick stuff in the bill, and if the majority or minority leader doesn't tell you who sent it, they can just say one of our colleagues put it in and not tell you who. But then you can go and you can say, hey, Reed McConnell, tell us who did this. So there's a little accountability. But what has gone by the wayside, thank God, is secret holds on nominations. It used to be that if you didn't like Richard Cordray or Elizabeth Warren or whomever, you could just put a secret hold and the whole nomination would be closed. And in essence, 99 senators wouldn't get a vote because one was holding a nomination.
And
that's gone.
I want to just get a little correction here, Mark, that you can help me out with this. You know, the original thing in the Constitution is that the Senate has the power to advise and consent.
That's correct.
Now, that doesn't mean approve.
Well, consent, I mean, most legal scholars would say consent does mean approve. Now, the question would be if the Senate refuses to take a vote on something.
Yeah.
That's a closer question. I mean, clearly, if the Senate does not consent, if the Senate votes down a nominee, there's no question the president can't appoint that nominee. That's clear.
Sure.
That's what consent means. But when the Senate refuses to advise and refuses to determine whether or not they consent, I think an argument can be made that no news is good news. And in fact, the Constitution does provide, as you know, Terry, that during recesses, when Congress is out of session, the president can go ahead and nominate people because the founders understood that if it's really important to the senators, they'll vote somebody down. The recess appointment only lasts until they take a vote, and then they could just go and vote somebody down. So the
Which unfortunately is what worked a lot better when they were only in session for maybe a couple weeks or a month out of the year. Now that they're in session the whole darn time, almost, it makes it much more difficult.
That's exactly right. And in terms of recess appointments, again, Ronald Reagan had a very large number, George W. Bush less, Bill Clinton less, and then the least of all is Barack Obama, because the Republicans have been keeping the Senate on really never going into recess so that Obama could have the recess appointments. And he tried to do recess appointments during these pro forma sessions, what they're calling, where they gavel in every 3 days and meet for 10 seconds and then gavel out, literally less than a minute. And there was a recent federal Court of Appeals opinion that said Obama could not appoint people during this time. And so, for example, the National Labor Relations Board.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, the court stripped that entirely.
Right. They said you have to have 5 members of it for it to function, which doesn't make any sense to me. If Congress is not allowing it to function, then
that's right.
Well, I mean, this is a law. National Labor Relations Act is a law. If Congress doesn't like that law, then change the law. Right? But to say we're not going to allow you to appoint, same thing with Dodd-Frank. If you don't like Dodd-Frank, repeal it. That's what they argued in the election, and they lost. But if you don't like a law, and you say, well, we're not going to allow anyone to be nominated, I'm okay with saying, look, I love Elizabeth Warren, but if they vote her down, they say, we don't like Elizabeth Warren, again, they have that right under the Constitution. What I don't know that they have the right to do, but apparently they do, according to the courts, is simply to not allow anyone. They won't allow Mr. Smith. They won't allow anybody. They won't allow someone they love, John McCain, whomever. They won't allow anyone to sit in that seat because they don't want the National Labor Relations Board to function. They don't want the Consumer Protection Board to function. That's really an attack on democracy.
And part of the essence of this is, it's safer for any congressman and any senator. It's safer to do nothing.
That's true.
It's a better chance of getting reelected if you do nothing. Now, you can stand up and say you are for something or against something all you want, but if you don't do anything, then you've got a much better chance of being reelected. And unfortunately, this is the way, to me, that Washington has been ultimately corrupted, because now it is just simply staying in power, the perks of power. They don't even need to use the power because the perks of power are so grand to begin with. So why would you do anything? Why would you vote your conscience when you know darn well if you do, Rush Limbaugh is going to rip it to shreds, and you're going to lose the election the next time around because of the Tea Party or whatever. We've gotten so far away from just honest debate and honest consideration and honest action, that I do honestly believe, Mark, our democracy is at peril. I really believe that.
See, here's what happens. I think one party goes too far, and then the other party goes back against them, and then the other party goes back against them, and suddenly we're swinging, for the hills, and we're not doing any kind of compromise or meeting in the middle. So you have Republicans threatening to default on the national debt. You have people changing district lines while a black senator is away on Martin Luther King Day in honor of Stonewall Jackson, and and making sure that blacks can't vote in Virginia. You have the drawing of the gerrymandering lines. You have the filibusters, and then you have Republicans have done more filibusters under President Obama than every single Congress in all of American history for the last 200 plus years have ever done filibusters. By far.
In fact, they've done it by never having to actually do a filibuster.
That's right.
They just threaten it.
So and then Republican talking heads, conservatives, they go on these TV programs and they say, the Senate didn't pass a budget, or the Senate's dysfunctional. Why can't the Democrats get anything through while we're filibustering, preventing them from doing it?
Right.
I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've debated, Republicans that say, that the Democrats control the Senate. They don't control the Senate. No. I wish they did. If they had 60 votes, which they had for 6 weeks or so when they passed health care, but they've had 60 votes less than a year of all of Obama's presidency. That was the only time they controlled the Senate.
Yeah, and we've got to all kind of remember too. The whole concept of divided we stand, or united we stand, divided we fall. And it's not so simple as, again, aggression. It's not so simple as civil war. All you've got to do is create in the government enough chaos, enough obstacles to doing anything, and that creates in and of itself divisions to a point that we simply cannot act. And there's one thing that government has to do in a very rapidly changing world, is it does have to act. It does have to legislate.
So how do we, the people, then, this is We Act Radio, AM 1480, how do we act in order to get our government to act? I was talking to my Virginia senator, because as a Democrat, and I want the Democrats, I got to tell you, if this Republican middle of, the national holiday, I'd like to say middle of the night because that's how I felt about it, little trick occurred where they can basically never allow the Democrats of Virginia to ever have fair votes, I say the Democrats should simply block everything. Bring the state down, bring it to a standstill. I'm ready for this, Don't vote on a budget, don't withhold their votes on everything, and basically shut the government down until we can have a government that's representative of the people. Now, that may sound very strong. I got to say, after Bush v. Gore, when Al Gore won the election and the Supreme Court appointed George Bush to be president, the loser of the 2000 race in the popular vote and in Florida, again, I argued that the Senate should filibuster every one of his judicial appointees. But see, that's the problem here. I'm actually arguing for escalation because sometimes I think it takes a really strong stand to stop a really strong stand, but we never ever get back together. How do we ever persuade politicians to do what's in the American people's interest and not what's in their party's interest? I don't know if you have any clues.
Well, there's only one way, unfortunately, and you can check through history for it. When things fall apart bad enough, then some unity and some progress can be created after usually years of trial and destruction.
That's a scary thought.
And if you look throughout history, this is the case. It hardly ever happens. People get complacent, people get distracted, people get corrupted. This is what happens in almost any society, any organization, until there is some point where the whole system is going to fall down. And when the whole system is going to fall down, it's a very dangerous time. It can go either direction, as we saw in Russia, as we saw in Germany. It's a very frightening time. And so my point, and I think what we do on We Act Radio, and I know you do, Mark, is we just keep on trying to educate the public so that the seeds are planted so that as the crisis heightens, there at least can be the potential for really good change. But until that happens, we're just going to keep on muddling around.
Well, Terry, I'll tell you, you sort of touched on what I think is a less horrific solution. The horrific solution of Russia or Germany or America in the Great Depression is a horror beyond imagination, really.
Yeah.
I like to think that by doing exactly what you say, by educating people, by simply calling them out. You know, they say that you shine a light on a cockroach and it scurries away. That the best way, that sunlight is the best disinfectant. There's probably 12 more cliches
I've
here.
never seen a congressman scurry, but anyway.
Shine a light on them. They run away. They're like vampires, I swear. You put up garlic or they just run away. But seriously, shining a light on it. By us shining a light on what's happening in Virginia, Wisconsin, all these states, shining a light on Bush v. Gore, shining a light on gerrymandering, shining a light on filibustering, and I'd ask President Obama to do the same. Call them out. Because the Virginia Senate plan, we don't know whether it's going to succeed or not. But if you live in the state of Virginia, and We Act Radio is broadcast throughout a lot of Northern Virginia, if you will call your governor and call your local representative in Virginia and tell them this is disgusting and you believe that the voters should decide who represents them rather than letting the politicians decide who's in office, which is actually the beginning of tyranny, and that this is disgusting that even though the votes were even, they waited till a black guy was gone on Martin Luther King Day to basically disenfranchise blacks in Virginia. If you let people know how disgusting this is, then maybe we could bring our country back from the brink without requiring the German or Russian answer, which is pretty bleak. Pretty damn bleak.
That's my hope, too, and that's why we keep on broadcasting, right?
That is exactly right, and I want to thank you, Terry. An hour went very quickly. By the way, Terry, before we close, I don't know if you are able to go to marklevinetalk.com and actually see the video. Have you been able to do that?
Of which video?
marklevinetalk.com. You can actually see video starting today and every week from here forward on Sunday from noon to 3. You'll be able to see the Raucous Caucus broadcast noon to 1. See, not just here, see at marklevinetalk.com. I'm waving right now to the camera. This is our first inaugural video broadcast, which is why we had a few technical difficulties. And eventually we hope to bring in Terry by Skype and actually show everybody here. And we're also...
If this actually happens, Mark, it's probably going to cause a sexual revolution.
A sexual revolution?
Once we're all broadcast and they see us up close and personal, it's dangerous. It's exciting. I can't wait.
Terry,
yes?
Have you had your narcissistic gene checked? I just think you might want...
No, but I will soon.
You might want to see your doctor about that. All right, well, that's it for the Raucous Caucus. We'll be back
Mark.
next week at noon. Don't miss us every Sunday, 1480 a.m. And if you missed any part of this, like I said, you can tune into the video. It'll be on my website, marklevinetalk.com, and also presumably on the We Act Radio website as well. We're going to sign off here, but coming up, I host the Inside Scoop, and we're going to talk about President Obama's inauguration speech and why it really is one of the best, strongest calls for liberal values that I've heard from the president or anyone in a long time. It was really quite an evocative speech, and one that I think hasn't got enough credit in the press. So we're going to go through the speech and also take some of your calls if you want to join in at 202-889-9797. This is Mark Levine. We'll be right back with the Inside Scoop.
Until we meet again.
See you next week, Terry, at noon.
Okay, Mark, thanks.
All right, take care.